Hello, and welcome back to the #1 survival guide of the Cylinder. And today, we shall venture through the mud and tall grass of the great northern bogland that meets the shores of Orgrim Lake. As you walked through the vast northeastern hill country, the land in front of you suddenly began to flatten out and become much more green, and you'd realized that you had just entered the great bogland. Far below, at the base of one of the large channels that runs through the bog, was a large brown line. It was the dam of a great beaver. Great beavers are functionally very similar to normal beavers. However, the sheer scale of the great bog provides an abundance of resources for these creatures, allowing them to become colossal. And in that way, these beavers almost have a symbiotic relationship with the bog, as their massive dams turn this swamp from just a completely normal river system to a massive swampland. You continued down from the hill country into the swampland, and as you did, a wall of condensation, insects, and the singing of tree frogs hit you in the face. But these were no ordinary tree frogs. They were in fact dancing frogs. Dancing frogs are a very strange bipedal arboreal species of bullfrog that were originally thought to be nothing but folklore. But with the rise of science and creature classification, they were eventually discovered. One thing you might have noticed about these frogs from our visual recreation is that instead of using their arms to climb trees, they tend to use their stretchy tongue, almost like a grappling hook, to hoist themselves into the trees. Through the unwavering white noise of insects and frogs singing, you heard the splash of water in the distance. It was an emerald fishing spider. These enormous arachnids stalk the shallow, mucky waters of the swamp, staying completely still and silent for sometimes hours, waiting for prey to approach them, and then striking with their spear-like tails. In fact, in some cases they stay still for so long that moss and other plants begin to grow around them, improving their camouflage. We trekked further inland into a clearing, with a visible animal trail into a patch of reeds nearby. As you stood there, taking in the sights and the smells, you spotted a small group of Orgrim horses on the other side of the clearing, coming through the tree line. Orgrim horses are a species of semi-aquatic horse that eat lichen, moss, leaf litter, swamp muck, and various floating plants. They also possess extremely long necks and very strong lung capacities, allowing them to walk through somewhat deep water, as well as fully submerging themselves occasionally. You decided to go down the animal trail through the reeds, and that led you to the incredible sight of a shimmer of white-winged dragons. White-winged dragons are a species of highly social, very large dragon that, despite their size and overall appearance, surprisingly actually don't really mind humans, as they primarily eat fish and other aquatic creatures. Which is also the reason for their extremely white scales, as from the perspective of the fish they're hunting, the light bouncing off their white scales makes their shadow almost completely disappear, making them almost entirely invisible from the water. And one important thing to note about the white wings is that they are the only dragon species that flies south for the winter, as their primary food source becomes almost entirely inaccessible during the winter. And so they must fly south to the equatorial mangrove swamps. And to many native creatures, this can prove quite temporarily devastating, as many native animals rely on the white wing's feeding grounds to be safe from larger predators, as they know any other predators will not approach the white wings. And while you were marveling at the spectacle of these dragons, you noticed another one of these native creatures. It was a golden swan eagle. Swan eagles are long-legged, very crane or heron-like birds of prey that, despite their more fish-hunting-oriented bodies, are still able to take down larger prey like ducks and small reptiles. You continued trekking down the riverbank until suddenly you heard a large splash in the water and saw a massive fish breach the water. It was the mighty orangeback bass. The orangeback bass is an exceedingly large lion-weight predator that use the thick layers of floating water plants to their advantage when hunting large creatures grazing on the floating plants, which are usually Orgrim horses, but also occasionally include juvenile whitewings when they stray too far from the group. You began moving into a large patch of reeds once again, except this time it didn't look quite like reeds. It looked almost more like grass, yet still not quite. Then, suddenly, a couple of these blades of whatever they were began to move and curl, almost as if they were alive. And then, one of them grabbed onto your ankle. It was carnivorous duckweed. Carnivorous duckweed is a large species of water plant that, rather than reproducing with seeds or spores, reproduce by reaching a certain size and then splitting apart, meaning that every single one of these plants are the same individual. As for how these plants feed, they use their long, sticky plant tendrils and pull large prey down into their tangled root system, where they will be slowly digested over the weeks. And once they're done, there's nothing left but a skeleton in the water column that will likely be eaten by bottom feeders. And unfortunately, this was your ultimate fate, as you became just one more skeleton in the mass grave that is the Great Bog. And that now brings us to the end of this chapter of the Survival Guide.